Saudações a todos. Hoje realizamos com muita alegria nossa aula magna do Centro de Educação. Faço saudação a todas as nossas graduações e pós-graduações, a comunidade acadêmica como um todo da UEPB. Agradeço todo o apoio recebido para a realização dessa aula. Primeiro, ao professor Joseph, por aceitar o nosso convite, ao professor Otacílio e professora Margarete, pela organização do evento, à professora Ellen, pela tradução cuidadosa, ao colega Hipólito, pela transmissão na rede UEPB, ao pró-reitor de pesquisa, professor Francisco Jaime, e à magnífica reitora, pela constante parceria e trabalho realizado pelo crescimento da nossa instituição. Passo agora a palavra à magnífica reitora Célia Regina, para sua saudação inicial.
Boa noite a todas as pessoas que estão nos assistindo nesse momento. Quero cumprimentar a comunidade universitária da Universidade Estadual da Paraíba, neste momento, particularmente o Centro de Educação. Quero cumprimentar a todos os professores e professoras, técnicos, técnicas, todos os servidores terceirizados da nossa instituição. Dar o meu boa noite e também outras pessoas que estão também participando deste maravilhoso evento, né, de abertura da aula magna do semestre letivo 2023.1. Quero cumprimentar o nosso diretor, professor Arlindo Aguiar, nossa diretora adjunta, professora Margarete Melo. Gostaria de cumprimentar o nosso pró-reitor de pós-graduação e pesquisa, professor Francisco Jaime. Mando o meu abraço também à professora Nádia, pró-reitora adjunta. Cumprimento neste momento o professor Otacílio, que está aqui também fazendo a tradução. Mando o meu abraço também à professora Ellen, né? Quero mandar o meu abraço carinhoso à minha vice-reitora, que está também nos acompanhando, tentando entrar, está com uma internet um pouco instável, mas também está aqui conosco, professora Vânia Fonseca. Meus cumprimentos a Hipólito Lucena, nosso coordenador de comunicação da Codecom, e quero cumprimentar com muito carinho ao nosso palestrante de hoje, o professor Joey Tranquillo. Seja bem-vindo, professor, à nossa instituição, mesmo de maneira remota, mas é um prazer recebê-lo neste momento e partilhar com você a alegria da nossa instituição estar retornando as suas atividades acadêmicas do semestre letivo 2023.1 de forma presencial. Eu quero dar as boas-vindas aos estudantes ingressantes no Centro de Educação e a todos os estudantes e a todas as estudantes da nossa instituição e também aos veteranos e às veteranas que estão aqui conosco. Desfrutem de tudo que a nossa universidade oferece, uma universidade que completou agora no dia 15 de março seus 57 anos, uma universidade valente, é uma universidade que é pública e que é gratuita e que também tem muita qualidade no desenvolvimento humano, no desenvolvimento científico da Paraíba, do Nordeste e do Brasil. Então, meus cumprimentos nesse momento, o meu abraço virtual a todas as pessoas. E fico muito feliz aqui de participar deste evento. Muito obrigada, professor Arlindo.
Passo a palavra ao professor Francisco Jaime para a sua saudação inicial.
Boa noite a todos os ouvintes. Gostaria de saudar aqui nossas magníficas reitoras, professora Célia e professora Ivonildes. Da mesma forma, os diretores do CEDUC, professor Arlindo e professora Margarete, por terem organizado esse momento aqui tão precioso. É sempre importante fazer esse momento de acolhida, sobretudo aos estudantes que estão ingressando na universidade, para que eles possam se sentir parte efetivamente da universidade e ver o que a universidade está preparando para eles. Agradecer ao professor Tranquillo por estar hoje aqui nos prestigiando com essa magnífica palestra que vai tratar um pouquinho sobre as mudanças do paradigma do ensino superior. Então, por mais que eu não seja muito da área de educação, sou professor e na pós-graduação, a gente discute muito essa necessidade dessas mudanças do paradigma. Então, assim, a gente questiona muito o que é que a gente ensina, como a gente ensina, o que é que as pessoas que a gente está querendo ensinar querem efetivamente aprender. Então, são discussões que transpassam a graduação e vão além, ainda mais na pós-graduação, e, sobretudo, nessa mudança rápida que a gente está tendo com o tempo, onde antigamente eu ensinava química, a gente ensinava as pessoas a aprender a tabuada, a decorar a tabela periódica, coisas que hoje não faz absolutamente nenhum sentido. Você aprender essas coisas, aprender esses conceitos. É muito mais a questão de você buscar a aplicação dos conceitos do que decorar os conceitos em si. Então, a gente tem que discutir muito hoje a questão da inovação, do empreendedorismo. São coisas, são palavras novas dentro do vocabulário acadêmico, mas são coisas que estão vibrando na cabeça das pessoas, dos estudantes que estão se formando. Eles querem abrir seu próprio negócio, querem arranjar o seu local no mercado, e, ao mesmo tempo, os professores têm que se preparar. A gente tem que aprender a conviver com as novas tecnologias. Nós, professores, de uma maneira geral, somos um tanto quanto resistentes a mudanças, mas as mudanças estão aí, e certamente o professor Tranquillo vai tratar muito sobre coisas que esse ano saíram, que parece ser novidade, mas não tem nada de novidade. É exemplo do ChatGPT. Então, quando saiu essa notícia do ChatGPT, todo mundo ficou espantado, mas essa inteligência artificial já existe há muito mais tempo e ela vai evoluir cada vez mais. E como nós, professores, estudantes, estamos preparados para aproveitar essas tecnologias em prol do conhecimento, em prol da aplicabilidade. Então, assim, são assuntos diversos. A gente pode passar efetivamente horas e horas aqui conversando, e assim, vai ser um grande desafio, professor Tranquillo, conseguir organizar esse multidão de informações e de mudanças que estão acontecendo, para que vocês possam aí depois continuar na graduação de vocês, discutindo isso com os professores de dentro do espaço acadêmico. Saúdo a todos e todas e desejo aí uma boa apresentação. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, professor Francisco. O professor Otacílio deve fazer a apresentação do nosso palestrante e da metodologia da conferência. Professor Otacílio, por favor.
Boa noite, é um prazer estar aqui nesse evento tão importante para a nossa universidade, para o Centro de Educação. Eu gostaria de, em nome da reitora, saudar todos os professores que estão aqui nessa live, também que estão nos acompanhando em suas casas, em seus trabalhos, né? O corpo discente também está aqui participando conosco, o corpo técnico administrativo, toda a comunidade reunida nesse encontro importante, né? Então, gostaria de apresentar o professor Joseph Tranquillo. Ele é professor da Universidade de Bucknell, em Lewisburg, no estado da Pensilvânia, no estado que fica próximo a Nova York, Nova Jersey. Tive a oportunidade até de conhecer a universidade algumas vezes. Joe tem uma formação acadêmica assim muito consistente, né? Ele estudou no Trinity College, ele fez estágio na Universidade de Stanford, passou um ano em Stanford, esteve na Finlândia, já esteve no Chile diversas vezes, esteve no Peru, esteve recentemente em Gana. Então, é uma pessoa assim, muito dada, né, a compartilhar o seu conhecimento. Ele é da área de engenharia de biomedicina, mas ele tem inúmeros trabalhos também publicados na área de educação, não é? Então, o Joe é um pesquisador, eu diria um pesquisador nato. E também como professor da UEPB e conhecedor da pessoa dele, né, eu me senti no dever também de convidá-lo para disponibilizar uma palestra para nós e, quem sabe, até parcerias futuras, né, junto com a Universidade de Bucknell. Ele esteve aqui em Campina Grande, ele conhece Campina Grande, ele conhece a UEPB, ele esteve conosco, nossas famílias estivemos na UEPB, a Aliança do Natal, conhecemos o CEDUC, conhecemos a biblioteca do CEDUC, conhecemos as salas de aulas do CEDUC, fomos à parte administrativa, fomos lá na Prograde, Então, ele esteve também na UEPB, esteve em Campina Grande, ele conhece a nossa Paraíba, conhece Campina Grande, conhece João Pessoa. Então, é uma honra tê-lo aqui conosco, né? Então, Joe, after my first words, I would like to thank you for joining us. It is very important for us this moment. And then I would like that, I think you can start your talk, right? Joe escreveu o texto, nós traduzimos, eu, Helen e uma amiga nossa, Kelly. A parte inicial do texto, o embasamento teórico, assim, é muito consistente. Certa parte da linguagem não é muito das humanidades, mas a maior parte do texto é muito interessante porque ele vai trazer reflexões bem práticas, não é, baseada na experiência dele lá em Bucknell, nos Estados Unidos. Sabemos que as universidades americanas são pagas, isso é mencionado no texto. Então, ele traz essa experiência dele para nós, não é? E a parte prática ela é longa. Então, eu consideraria que nós prestássemos bem atenção na parte teórica e nos preparássemos para a parte prática, cujas ideias o professor Jaime até já introduziu aí. So, Joe, you can start your talk. Thank you very much again.
Very good.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Otacílio, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you all today. The ideas that I'll be sharing have been in my mind for a long time, but this is my first attempt to put them on paper or present them to others in any way. So please be patient with my musings. I hope to have a much more refined version of this to share with you sometime in the future. The talk will highlight tensions that exist in higher education, making the case that we're ripe for a paradigm shift, and then speculate about what higher education might look like on the other side. As the quote that's part of the paper highlights, education has been disrupted many times in the past, and like most paradigm shifts, it'll only appear sudden in retrospect, perhaps spanning over a career or two. This shift is already happening, and the evidence is all around us. It's going to challenge us to re-examine our purpose and our value to society. So a few disclaimers before we dive in. The first is that this talk explores the disruption of our educational mission. A similar analysis might be done on scholarship, and that may be interesting, but that's not my focus tonight. The second is that my views are necessarily biased. As you saw from my record, I'm an academic, and I currently serve as an administrator at a small private institution that focuses on weird, and that's Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic populations, mostly between 18 and 22 years old. I'm very aware that some of what I'll be sharing is based on Western European colonial ideas, and I very much hope that that'll change on the other side of the paradigm shift. Third, I'll be building on complex adaptive systems theory. Again, that's a bias of my own scholarly background. Lastly, this is more of a theoretical talk, but I'll hint along the way at practical implications. So we'll begin with some of those grounding ideas: the function of higher education, the forces that build up tension, and how systemic tensions are released. So the first is the educational function of education. Higher education has historically balanced two purposes: the creation of new knowledge in the form of scholarship and the education of the next generation of citizens. Now, over time, universities have assumed other functions, so stimulating new jobs, generating intellectual property, but the focus of my talk will be on education. So I'll say a few words about the foundations of learning and education, just so we have some definitions. Learning is when an entity changes something internal to itself. It's different before and after. And as a result, it can generally do something new or different than before. Learning is a property of an adaptive system. And generally, it requires an expenditure of energy to make that change. In my systems language, that's a reversal of some thermodynamic process. You don't have to worry about that. Now, we could go into all sorts of epistemological detours on the process by which Information and knowledge are constructed and stored and organized and called upon on when needed. By this broad definition, learning can and often does take place without a teacher. An entity just learns from its environment. Education makes this process intentional. The transfer of information from an entity that possesses the information and another that doesn't.
Joe, wait
Yes.
a minute, please. Could you tell me what number of the paragraph? Because I lose something here in the screen,
Oh,
so I
it's
have
okay.
to find that.
Let me see if I can find that quickly. I have let's see. I have my version up, so I have to find your version. Let me see. Just give me a moment. Okay. I'm at 7.
7. Okay. All right.
Number 7.
There you go. Okay.
You ready?
You're ready. Keep going, please. Thank you.
Okay. Education makes this process intentional. The transfer of information from an entity that possesses the information to another that doesn't. And this process is not passive. And it's present in animals. It's beginning to occur in semi-intelligent machines and almost certainly in aliens if they exist. So for this talk, our interest is in people. And Ken Bain has my favorite, very simple definition. Learning has taken place when someone thinks, acts, or feels differently. Now, the current model of higher education is not monolithic. It's built upon the history of young adult education. The systems literature would call this path dependency. We moved from small collectives of elite thinkers and private tutors to the origins of institution of higher learning, like the University of Pisa, that primarily educated clergy and some specialized professions, to the modern university that arose in the mid-1900s in response to the Industrial Revolution. This was the origin of degrees and majors and grades and many aspects of our current system. Each of these were paradigm shifts, yet some vestiges of the old model always remained. So I want to talk now about complex adaptive systems. Complex adaptive systems, or higher education, is an excellent example of a complex adaptive system. The rules, the practices, the structures and policies, they emerge bottom up from the action of many, many actors. There's no centralized or top-down control, but power and influence may be unevenly distributed. Complex systems are inhomogeneous, but patterns arise. They exist somewhere between being very orderly and very disorderly. Most are open, meaning they require input from their surrounding environment. Yet they maintain some degree of independence. They're separated from their environment by a semi-permeable membrane. As a result, they maintain a homeostasis, some internal integrity, despite all of the perturbations coming from the outside. The inability to maintain that integrity is the death of the system. Now, these types of systems are known as autopoietic. They contain within them all the complex and interacting functions that they need to maintain their own existence, only needing the external environment for some energy and raw materials that turn order into disorder. For example, they can adapt. They can create new functions that'll solve the challenges presented to them by the environment. Now, this might sound that I'm arguing that higher education is alive. The theoretical biologists from Chile, Mentora and Varela, who laid the theoretical groundwork for autopoietic systems, they were using living cells as their model. But I suspect that they would argue that higher education displays most, if not all, of the hallmarks of a living organism. Now, some curious phenomenon arise in autopoietic systems. First, although they maintain a homeostasis in the short term, over time, they'll begin to mirror aspects of their environment. This is known as Conway's law. If you want to go look it up. In other words, higher education will adapt over time by solving the challenges presented to it by society. Second, autopoietic systems are metastable. They possess more than one homeostatic state with the ability to switch back and forth between them. In humans, an example is walking and running. They require very different coordination of muscle firings. And the result is that you can comfortably walk at one pace and run at another fit pace, but it's uncomfortable to move at that pace in between. Now, faculty do this switching all the time, back and forth between being a teacher and a scholar. Third, autopoietic systems use exaptation. That's the ability to take a function that emerged for one purpose and then use it to perform a different function. Spaces at university may have been designed for one purpose, but then they're often used in a different context. So I now want to turn to tensions, avalanches, and where paradigm shifts come from. So Otacílio, we're at number 12 now, if you follow.
Yes, that's right.
Systems that can maintain a homeostasis must be able to absorb those perturbations that are coming from the outside environment. But over time, those tensions build up and they have to be released. The physicist Pierre Bach studied this phenomena in a very simple mathematical model of an open adaptive system. More specifically, it was a model that simulates a pile of sand, where the more sand that you're dropping, there are a few grains at a time from the outside. That sand pile can absorb the tension through the friction between grains of sand, but eventually the tension is released in an avalanche. After an avalanche, the pile contains much less tension than it did before. Now, Bach's studies came to many interesting conclusions, which I won't go into detail here, but one is of relevance to our study of higher education. The level of tension, even if it's high, is not a predictor of when or how large the next avalanche will be. The same tension could be released through many small avalanches or through one big avalanche. And Bach went on to provide evidence that this avalanche behavior was evident in systems such as biological and technological evolution, known as punctuated equilibrium, the economy, and the metabolism of nearly all living organisms. Bach studied primarily physical, natural or human-made systems, but he hinted that avalanches might be present in conceptual systems. And it's been noted by myself and some others that Bach's ideas of avalanches bear a resemblance to Thomas Kuhn's concept of a paradigm shift. In Kuhn's theory, tension is built up through observations and experiments that don't align with the currently accepted theory of a phenomenon. Attempts will be made to release tension with small avalanches, slight modifications, adjustments to the current theory. However, if that tension continues to build up through more anomalous data, the system may undergo a paradigm shift. Kuhn's canonical example was the move from Newton's to Einstein's description of gravity. Over time, Newton's description built up paradoxes and unexplained phenomenon that were described by Einstein's more comprehensive description. Kuhn chose a massive shift to illustrate his point, but we see evidence in science and other fields that, like the avalanche model, there's paradigm shifts of all different sizes. Now, there's not a perfect isomorphism between Bach and Kuhn's work. The simplistic model that Bach was studying was not adaptive. The rules that govern the sand pile could not change, and the pile would be erasing its own history over time. This is unlike Kuhn's paradigm shifts, where path dependencies from the previous paradigms are preserved. I'm proposing that higher education has undergone paradigm shifts in the past, and the other paradigm shifts, although not predictable in their timing or size, are inevitable. Events such as pandemics, wars, political unrest, new technologies, or natural disasters may speed up or slow down the shift, but tension will continue to build. And if and when higher education undergoes a paradigm shift, it should be a system with less tension on the other side. So I now want to switch to another concept that we'll build on, and that is the external forces. All autopoietic systems have a bidirectional relationship with their environment. Higher education is no different. To organize our analysis of the environment surrounding higher education, I'll use what's known as the steepled framework. That's an acronym for social, technological, economic, environmental, political, legal, ethical, and demographic. Now, Each of these areas on its own is a complex adaptive system that's open to all the others. Some may even be considered autopoietic. Together, they form this super complex intertwined systems. At one time, one area will lead while the others will lag. Each is dropping grains of sand into the other, building up tensions. And a change in one area of steepled, maybe through an avalanche, might ripple through all the other areas. And it's not uncommon for this ripple effect to even feed back on the original area that began the perturbation in the first place, forming what Douglas Hofstadter calls tangled hierarchies. We use terms like agricultural revolution and industrial revolution or digital revolution because a new technology set off a domino effect that impacted all of the areas of steepled. Problems that arise in one area might be solved in another or made worse. And no one person or group could possibly untangle this super complex system in its totality. In other words, my attempt at dissecting these types of systems and the tensions they create is doomed to be hopelessly simplistic. So the last theoretical piece I want to bring up are super wicked problems. The last theoretical idea I introduced is the nature of a wicked problem. Rydell and Weber describe 10 characteristics of a wicked problem. I won't go through all of them here, but they include not having a definitive formulation. It's hard to even state the problem separate from its symptoms. Every wicked problem is wicked in its own way. There's an infinite possible number of solutions. Progress is hard or maybe even impossible to measure. Steepled is a helpful framework, but it's not going to solve a wicked problem. Levine et al. Went even farther to explain that some problems are super wicked because time is running out. There's no central authority, and those seeking to solve the problem are actually the ones causing it. Some good examples are the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. For example, no more poverty, gender equity, and climate change. These are great examples of super wicked problems. And in fact, one of the super wicked problems of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is quality education. So with that theory behind us, I'm going to move to the next part, and that is to explore the tensions within higher education, and then turn to the tensions that we're feeling as a result of our external environment. So to begin, I want you to consider a quote from Larry Spence. A 12th century farmer would only recognize the cows in a modern dairy farm. A 13th century physician would run screaming from a modern operating room. Galileo could only gape in wonder touring NASA's Johnson Space Center. And Columbus would be terrified of a nuclear sub. But a 15th century professor would feel right at home in most of our classes. Now, Spence's point is that other professions have adapted to changes in the world, but many in higher education have resisted that change. This is just one of the tensions that's been built up over time. Before we dive into the specific tensions, I'll introduce an overly simplistic three-part framework. First is how we teach. What do we do as educators? And that depends on who we teach, where learning takes place, and what we assume about the learning process. The second is what we teach. This is dependent on our goals, our areas of expertise that we possess in the academy, and what we assume our students need. The third is why we teach. This is rooted in what we assume is our purpose and our role in society. So let's explore this framework just a little bit more detail. First is how we teach. How we teach is based in large part on what we know about the learning process. I can only scratch the surface of what we have learned about learning. We know that students only retain between about 2 and 5% of what they hear in a lecture. The more that they participate, the more this percentage goes up, and it can go all the way up to 90% if the learner is asked to teach someone else. In other words, teaching is the best way to learn material. The irony has not escaped me that I'm actually giving this talk as a lecture online. Now, humans, we've learned, build from concrete experiences to theory rather than the other way around. We get better with practice and learn even faster when we receive feedback. Reflection is a critical part of the learning process, as too is a balance between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Emotions play an important role, and therefore mental, physical, and emotional safety are important in learning. Neuroscientists have verified that Wittgenstein was right. We do store knowledge in these tangled webs of concepts, constructing new knowledge by layering on top of what we already know. Learning can be a social process. We learn from peers and near peers. The teacher is maybe only one player in the overall learning process. My small contribution has been to explore the possibility that learners are undergoing a series of internal avalanches as they reorganize their mental models. Based on these and other findings, many in education are recentering the student. Teachers become a guide on the side rather than a sage on the stage. The learning environments we create are more social and active and creative. And this changes the kind of challenges and assignments that we offer to our students, as well as how we assess their learning. So I want to turn now to what we teach. What we teach is influenced by many factors. We have opinions about what must be taught, what's good for our students to know, and what's just merely interesting. It's our intent to help our students understand a model of the world as it was understood, as we understand it now, or how we might imagine it could be. It's also influenced by the textbooks that we adopt, other courses in our curricula, the norms and policies of our institution, and how similar content is covered at other institutions. How do we balance exploration of the world with exploration of the self? We can't cover everything, yet some topics require prior knowledge. Scaffolding and coordination is essential. Building on the ideas of Benjamin Bloom, we can ask if a goal is simply awareness of a topic or if it's to become an expert creator or evaluator. Is there more to teach than knowledge and skills? For example, some institutions add in the cultivation of personal habits and mindsets, as well as a sense of agency, identity, or purpose. So why we teach? Why we teach is grounded in what we believe to be the purpose of higher education. There are two interwoven threads here. One is personal and one is social. On a personal level, individual faculty consider whether being a professor is a calling, a profession, or a job. As a calling, being a professor is similar to being a spiritual leader or emergency worker or nurse, a noble profession that no one would go into for the pay or the stress or the upward mobility. We are attracted to the life of the mind and feel that we're playing a critical role in passing down sacred knowledge. It's not uncommon, however, for drift to occur. A calling becomes a profession and eventually just a job. There's actually a trend in the States of faculty leaving the university for other professions. This is not a criticism, but just rather an observation. The societal reason to teach is embedded in the values, mission, and vision of our universities. It might be mandated by a government or a board or administrative leadership. And we're going to discuss higher education's purpose further in a minute. Past models of higher education viewed how we teach, what we teach, and why we teach in a particular way that changed on the other side of a paradigm shift. So I'll now present 5 tensions that have built up in higher education. And then I'll present them as opposing poles, one side here and one side there. In reality, most faculty, departments, and entire schools have strong advocates on both sides. The first tension is credentialing versus growth and development. We have a duty to help our students grow, and it's fulfilling to see their progress. We also have a duty to society to graduate people who will make the world a better place. The impact of our students, however, is nebulous, and it occurs on a long time scale. As a proxy, credentials, so majors and minors and certificates, promise that our graduates have attained some level of proficiency. So let us explore first the case for credentialing. How we teach is impacted by scoring students using grading, what's known as summative assessment, that society can understand. A course is structured to build towards some level of mastery of necessary skills and knowledge. We design curricula using prerequisites so we can stack courses, advanced courses building on the competencies from previous courses. Not everyone will pass to the advanced courses. A phrase I've heard from colleagues is not everyone is cut out to be and you can fill in your discipline, philosopher, engineer, whatever. As faculty, we're concerned with things like grade inflation, as that harms our credibility with wider society. What we teach is then based on what it's possible to measure. We design assignments based upon learning objectives that can be assessed and demonstrate that students have achieved a desired level of competence. Elective courses may allow for some free exploration, but they typically conform to the paradigm of accessible assignments. The purpose of teaching becomes academic rigor that will be trusted by our colleagues and others outside the university. Internally, we also review our programs, and external accrediting bodies rely on this assessment of student work to provide their approval of a program or university. The goal is to give the public faith in our programs and our graduates. Some departments also feel an ethical obligation to maintain high standards. In my own discipline of biomedical engineering, we feel a duty to graduate students who can be trusted to create devices, such as pacemakers and artificial hips, that might someday be implanted into you. Now, the case for growth and development is based on the premise that if we teach students how to learn, regardless of their immediate mastery in college, that they will lead a happy and productive life. Holistic growth is an end in and of itself, but it will seed great work later in life. Furthermore, John Dewey, the educational philosopher, argued that educated citizens are the key to sustaining a democracy. Our teaching then focuses on formative feedback. We meet students where they are, indicate where they've grown, but also where they need more effort and attention. Faculty might move to things like ungrading or competency-based grading. Some universities, such as Hampshire or Reed College, have abandoned grades altogether. Courses and curricula are not the end goal, but rather to instill habits of mind and action, things like metacognition, reflection, critical thinking, creativity, organization, that will help encourage students to continue their growth throughout their lives. General education requirements and electives might dominate this experience. The purpose of higher education is a retreat from the world, to concentrate on cultivating your identity, your character, your ethics, your decision-making, your leadership, and other more abstract aspects of a self. Self-contained communities, our universities, look like sanctuaries, sometimes even with physical walls to keep out the distractions of the outside world. And that's become one of the dominant architectures of what we think of as a campus. So I want to turn to the next tension. And this is the tension between academics or the whole person. The case for academics is based upon the history of higher education. Academic growth is written into the mission of most universities. Other opportunities like student clubs or residential living, they're just all in the service of academics. Faculty are the keepers of the knowledge. We're the experts in the classroom, and we determine the best way to convey content to students. We tend to teach the way we were taught, and therefore lecture has dominated, and sometimes discussion has dominated. Learning is expected to be an individual endeavor. Courses and curricula are determined by the expertise of the faculty. We stick to what we know, and we assume that any non-academic growth is up to the student and is in the domain of others like family. We teach to preserve that sacred academic knowledge and skills, to ensure that it gets passed down to future generations. Students must progress from novice to competent at the undergraduate level and maybe to expert at the graduate level. We struggle with the balance between the depth of study in a particular academic domain versus having breadth across many domains. Some argue that academic habits of mind can only be sharpened by going deep, the major becoming the core of the experience. Others point out that in this post-disciplinary world, a generalized curriculum should dominate learning. This tension is very much related to Aesop's fable, with a modern interpretation by Isaiah Berlin of the hedgehog, who knows one thing very, very well, and the fox who knows many things. We often split the difference. Students will major in a discipline, but then earn minors and take electives to round out their education. The case for the whole person is an acknowledgement that students are embodied and emotional and socially embedded moral beings with their own identity and agency and sense of purpose. Universities are a place for them to grow along these dimensions too. The entire campus is engaged in the education of students, not only professors, students who are academically gifted, and even if they land a great first job, but they're deficient in other areas, they have little chance of thriving throughout their lifetime. Faculty acknowledge that there's more going on in their classroom than just the academic content. Learning is more emergent, and the faculty member is not always the expert in the room. Courses in this model are less driven by rigid learning objectives and more by opportunities for students to develop their strengths and grow into their weaknesses. Faculty are still the academic experts in the room, but there's much more freedom to explore. Classes may become more democratic. The students could co-create a syllabus or vote on the direction of the course. Faculty become more the guides on the side rather than that stage on the stage. This is profoundly uncomfortable for many faculty. Some universities are, in fact, hiring non-faculty professionals who help students with their non-academic development. At Bucknell, we're taking this model very seriously. We're asking the question that's driven the long tradition of the liberal arts. What does it mean to be a truly free citizen in the world? Clearly today, that seems to be more than academic knowledge. So we've created a Thrive framework composed of 4 simple objectives that students should try to achieve by the time they graduate. Every student should be able to say, I can meet my own basic needs. I can seek out spaces and people that help me feel a sense of belonging. I can find and use resources that are available to me. And I can continue to grow holistically in ways that will advance my identity, agency, and purpose. If a citizen can do each of these throughout their lives, they're almost certainly thriving. Now, each one of these 4 has sub-objectives. For example, safety is a basic need. And there's an objective we have for that too. I can enter an environment or situation, assess the risks to myself, and then take an appropriate action. Most students have already taken a step towards this objective, but it becomes our job to help them advance. Now, when written as learning objectives, we can use backwards design, we can create assignments, we can create challenges, and we can create assessments that might take place in or out of the classroom. So I want to move on to the next tension, and that is universities as either being selective and filtering versus being open access. The case for selectivity is based upon only some students being college ready for college. We expect them to already possess a solid grounding and desire to guide their own learning. There's little need for any supplemental support systems. Historically, higher education has only been for the elite, and most schools still reject students who don't meet some academic criteria. We're proud of our selectivity, and university ranking systems reward schools for low acceptance rates. As faculty, we take pride in the rigor of our courses. We worry about grade inflation. We design what are known as weed out courses to prevent students who are not up to the challenge from moving on. In other words, college is not for everyone. The case for more open access is to break through the status quo, to provide social mobility to families and students who are not from privileged backgrounds. It's based on both an ethical, this is the right thing to do, and a practical, we want to nurture anyone with talent, theme of social justice. However, open access means we need to become more student ready. An example in the States is that many schools are making entrance tests optional. Higher education is, after all, meant to be free. Teaching methods, in this case, meet every student where they are and try to avoid biases through techniques such as universal learning design. Struggling students have access to supplemental help, such as office hours and teaching assistants and boot camps and workshops and support centers staffed by non-teaching professionals. We consider the entire journey of students from recruitment to enrollment to orientation to retention and even to graduation. Financial aid is provided to soften loan debt. Some schools create unique cohorts of students to create peer support groups. More emphasis is placed on evaluative feedback rather than grades. And some faculty, as I mentioned before, are moving to contract or ungrading. We slow down and try not to cover everything. We focus only on the critical learning objectives. For that reason, the start of a course may cover some background material to catch up students who may have missed content due to their background. Why we teach is not only about social mobility. It's also related to Dewey's idea about education as the foundation of a strong and sustainable democracy. Poorly educated students will no longer make good collective decisions. So I want to move on to the next tension, and that's, should we be about preparing for career or should we be about the life of the mind? The case for career preparation is to help students get their first job on their way to a 40-plus year career. Students and their families see college as a pathway to financial stability and a fulfilling life. Historically, universities are trending in this direction, and it's what's attracting many students to college. How we teach is then about modeling aspects of the real world in our classrooms by introducing current methods, trends, events, case studies, non-academic guest speakers, showing where course material shows up in their profession, field trips to motivate students to think about their career, teaching professional skills such as working in teams, writing memos, or negotiation skills might all be part of a classroom experience. My own department scores students in some more advanced courses using a performance evaluation that's used in industry, not grades. Our lower level courses have a percentage of the final grade based on professionalism. The content also changes as the deep history and context of the discipline becomes less important, and it's replaced with career-focused competencies. Courses and curricula become more flexible to mirror trends in the outside world. And often I end classes with a professional moment, a story or a reflection that's meant to help students think about their career. I also spend a few weeks on practical applications of the course content. Some institutions give credit for internships, sometimes known as co-ops, and a few even require students to work in a professional setting while they're in school. Why we teach becomes about adding highly skilled laborers to the workforce. Now, the case for the life of the mind is where faculty and universities have expertise. We thrive in this environment, and we challenge students to follow us to the depths of our discipline, to experience what it's like to be down in those intellectual trenches. How we teach is about modeling how a scholar thinks. We expect students to be intrinsically motivated, like us. Assignments are meant to mimic the kinds of products that we value in academia, and we grade them sometimes in the same harsh way that our colleagues would evaluate us. We may engage students in our own scholarship and give them practice with interdisciplinary thinking, because this is where the academic action is. Anything that seems practical in the outside world is suspect. The goal is to remove as many distractions as possible so they can focus very narrowly on our learning goals. We believe that students study at the university because they wish to engage in the life of the mind. They'll learn what they need later on the job, later in life. We also want to find those students, of course, the very, very best, who will become professors like us. Now, a much more cynical view is that we're just creating copies of ourselves. But this is, in fact, the very nature of an autopoietic system. It's one that can create and maintain itself over long periods of time. Now, I want to share my own thinking about how we might balance this life of the mind and career preparation. 2 days ago, I spent an entire day reading over the mission, value, and vision of my university, the learning goals of each of our college, our strategic plan, and the campaign documents. It was hundreds of pages. The challenge I gave to myself was to distill this down to 3 or 4 ideas and use no buzzwords. And I came up with a 3-part framework for how I think our students should grow. The first is genuine care for others. This is about how to relate to another person through relational, not transactional connections. It's related to Kant's categorical imperative to treat others as ends in themselves and not means to your own end. To assume good intent, to meet others where they are and see every individual as a work in progress. I avoided buzzwords like empathy or intercultural humility or emotional intelligence in others, but they're implied. The second part is being a good steward of all the environments that you inhabit. These environments may be your friends, the university, your local community, church, clubs, or your country, or the entire world. The challenge is to be a good steward of all of them simultaneously. It hints at what Gregory Bateson calls a double bind. What might be good for one community might be harmful for another. Students need practice making decisions in these situations. Again, I avoided buzzwords like social justice, sustainability, the triple bottom line, the Anthropocene, entrepreneurship, economic development, but they're all implied in how to balance being a good steward of all the environments that you inhabit. The third is continuous investment in yourself. This is not selfish or only academic, but to challenge yourself to always be growing socially, emotionally, physically, mentally, financially, spiritually, your sense of identity, agency, purpose. Career is a consideration, but it's not the end goal. It's to always see yourself as a work in progress. Again, I've tried to avoid buzzwords, but contained within this are ideas of lifelong learning and mentorship and leadership and identity development. Now, this framework could be the entire subject of another talk, but as a hint, you can consider something like equity and inclusion. It touches on all 3 of these pillars: how to treat others, how to disrupt the status quo of society, and how to think of oneself as an intersectional individual. So I want to move to the next internal tension: the individual versus efficiency and scaling. The tension is between how do we treat an individual versus the efficiency of an organization, and that's inevitable, and it's been building over time. The case for the individual is the case to meet every student where they are in the learning process. Growth and development are inherently messy and inefficient, but learning, we know, is more robust when the teacher knows their students as individuals, not only their names, but their interests, their motivations, their goals. Some institutions assign every student a faculty advisor who can help them chart their own pathway. Others allow for asynchronous instruction or a competency certificate as opposed to grades in a course to accommodate individual needs. Courses might allow for flexibility and self-guided work, while curricula may have many electives outside the major. Some schools, in fact, allow the whole curriculum to be guided by the student to encourage the following of their passions. The university exists to amplify the individual student, in keeping with the humanistic position of putting the person at the center of all that we do. This becomes the reason we teach, to help each of our students grow into the person they wish to become. On the other hand, individual self-guided education is nearly impossible in practice and is the core of the case for efficiency. Universities don't have the resources to serve the need of everyone. And so what we do is to teach in classrooms with many students, often with one kind of delivery method, often lecture or discussion, because it's efficient and it scales well. We enlist the help of other students, teaching assistants, or allow students to teach or even grade each other. What we teach is also impacted. An efficient system strives to become more efficient. We choose topics and create assignments and assessments that can scale to many students. For example, we will build rubrics to operationalize our grading and explain our judgments to students and colleagues. Why we teach in this more corporate model is about our need to satisfy students who we view as paying customers. Course evaluations, numbers of incoming students, majors, and graduates are used to make decisions and compare ourselves to other institutions who we might view as competitors. If something can't be reduced to a number, then it must not matter. At some institutions, like my own, we've even hired administrators who do very little else other than watch over the numbers. I'm now going to touch on some external tensions that are coming from the outside, from the other areas of Steepled. So we'll start with social. Strong and sustainable societies have historically invested in education systems. Currently, we're being pushed to open up access in the name of equity, inclusion, and social justice. Simultaneously, there are social forces pushing colleges toward career preparation, which influences the disciplines that students choose. And some of these disciplines may be dying actually as a result. Our campuses are becoming more open systems. And due to Conway's law, this means that we're influenced by all the other areas of Steepled as well. But we tend to resist this. In a recent poll, though, in the States, over 50% of the adult population believes that higher education is going in the wrong direction. That's very scary to me. Technology. We've experienced some technological disruptions in the form of YouTube instruction, Khan Academy, companies that specialize in massively open online courses. Some universities, like the University of Phoenix, are entirely online and they require very little infrastructure. As a result, they operate with greatly reduced costs, which they then pass on to their students in the form of lower tuition. Digital courses and universities can also scale more easily and pivot more quickly to meet the changes in demand. I'm going to share more about technology later in the talk. Economics. So we give back to the economy by providing highly skilled labor, new ideas and technologies, as well as employing local staff and faculty. This is all accelerated due in large part to the societal need for more highly educated citizens. However, campuses often occupy prime real estate, and we rely on governmental support in the form of grants, financial aid, and in some cases, loans. As higher education has become more tightly regulated, more staff and administration, like me, have been added. We must remain financially sustainable. And generally, student tuition is used to offset our deficits. The result has been rising tuition costs, countering the move for open access. This creates a tension between adding more students to gain tuition and the overhead to support these students. However, not all aspects of higher education scale exactly the same way. Environmental. All sectors are being called to consider their environmental impact, often managing their carbon footprint by some combination of reaching zero emissions, purchasing offsets, or using technology. I'm giving this talk now and I didn't have to take a plane ride. My university has a bank of solar panels that supplies about 15% of our power, and there's plans to add more. Most of our buildings are LEED certified, meaning that they're much more energy efficient. Our carbon footprint is further offset with a bamboo field in Ghana. The solar panels, the LED buildings, the bamboo field, they're all also being used for both teaching and research purposes, and have resulted in new courses, a requirement for graduation, as well as 2 new majors in environmental engineering and environmental science. However, none of that has been easy. For example, I can tell you that our LEED buildings cost more to build. They're not as easy to maintain, and honestly, they have some really bad functional problems to them. Political. As Dewey pointed out, there's feedback between the education of citizens and the priorities that a voting electorate will support. Politicians tend to follow the will of the public and put out the fires of the day rather than invest in the future. Education is a long-term investment, and it's therefore susceptible to budget cuts and short-term swings in political support. Attention is how much political leaders value higher education relative to other priorities. I know both of our countries have had politicians who have publicly stated that the current model of higher education is broken and should be defunded. On the other hand, we have some countries, for example, Sweden, who believes that higher education is a basic right and that they'll provide full financial support to anyone who's accepted. So legal. Higher education has historically been an underregulated sector of society. However, several high-profile scandals have resulted in more and more scrutiny and regulations. These new regulations provide guardrails, but they also create new constraints. At my university, we've tried to buffer ourselves from as many legal regulations as possible. We have our own police force, waste removal, and energy production. The University of Cape Coast in Ghana has their own internal primary and secondary schools that teach their staff. They have their own farm, a fishery, and a water bottling plant. They're essentially their own self-contained community. Ethics. Ethics of higher education is very complex. We have codes of conduct for our students and faculty and staff, and internal review processes often to ensure accountability. These aim to protect the rights of students, faculty, staff, administrators, or third parties, and often to protect the learning environment. Paying a fair living wage to employees, keeping tuition low, maintaining confidentiality, opening access to those who are less privileged, and respecting privacy, they all have ethical dimensions. Tenure is a way to protect the intellectual rights of faculty, and shared governance is meant to include as many different stakeholders and decisions that might impact them. Questions we might ask are we running a business, or are we serving a vital social need? We might also ask, do we have a duty to help students grow, not only in their skills and knowledge, but also in other areas such as character? The last steeple domain is demographic. Many areas of the world are undergoing rapid demographic changes. More people are moving across national and international boundaries, often sparked by opportunity, famine, natural or human-created disasters, poverty, or political unrest. In many cases, leading to mass refugee crises. Developing countries need more highly educated citizens to continue their development. And worldwide, there's much more mixing of ethnicities, races, and social status. Many countries also have a greater awareness of differences in gender and sexuality. Who we're teaching in college classrooms is changing as a result, and we need to adapt to a much more diverse classroom. So I want to move on to the next part, now that we've discussed our tensions, to talk about where are we going? Which tensions will be released on the other side of this paradigm shift, and which will remain? Any prediction of where we're going is bound to be wrong in the details. Maybe universities will splinter, with some focusing entirely on research and others on scholarship and others on teaching. Could we go back to the ivory tower that's disconnected from the world and focused on the life of the mind? Or will we become much more integrated with society and become much more corporate-like? What will happen to grades or degrees or credentialing? The simple answer is I don't know, but I'll give you a hypothetical vision to illustrate how different college could look. And I invite you to imagine with me and think like a disruptor. As a person trained in the creation of new technology, my personal bias is that technology often leads change in society and in higher education. Plato viewed writing as a disruptive technology, one that would weaken the ability to memorize long passages. Just as the Industrial Revolution prompted a rethinking of higher education, the digital revolution, with the rise of laptops, the internet, social media, smartphones, is prompting a new learning revolution. We have learning management systems to organize our courses. We track student progress by entering grades into university-wide databases. Many of our assignments are completed and turned in completely digitally. My own institution is using algorithms to help make admissions decisions. And we're rolling out a chatbot that can answer student questions even in the middle of the night. It even has a name, Bucky the Bison, named after our school mascot. So I'd like to present two provocative and complementary views of how technology might impact formal education. I'm not predicting that these will happen, but All of the technology I will mention already exists. It simply hasn't been integrated yet. The first case study is a virtual reality environment. Imagine a student puts on VR goggles and enters a virtual room. In the room are clues and challenges that they need to figure out. It's like an escape room. The clues are all from a particular domain of knowledge. By completing the challenges, they receive a key that opens virtual doors to neighboring rooms. These rooms have more clues, but they're a bit harder, and they build off of what you learned in the previous room. The farther the student ventures into this virtual world, the more knowledge and skills they gain. They might even return to the original room to see the same material, but now with more complex clues to take on a deeper meaning. Virtual worlds are also a way for interacting with others. So some challenges might be impossible to overcome without banding together with others. Groups could go on quests together. Students could explore at their own pace, on their own schedule, and they're scored based on how much of the world they explore. We could even imagine that there are many of these virtual worlds, each for different areas of knowledge. But there could be portals between them. A virtual world of technology might have a portal to ethics or politics or sociology. These virtual worlds could also be created in the VR platform too, creating an learning environment much like what happens in Lego Minecraft. As a professor, you would move around building blocks that others have created. More advanced designers could create their own blocks. A teacher then becomes less of a content knowledge expert and more of a learning environment designer. Now, if an old professor like me could do this, so could our students. So imagine a student adding some of their own rooms with more advanced clues on the outskirts of the virtual world. They now become their own learning environment designers. Again, further blurring the line between who's the student and who's the instructor. This is the gamification of learning. And it uses all of the principles of what makes games fun and intrinsically motivating. But because it's virtual, it can scale up to any number of students and be disseminated anywhere in the world. It might even have live language translation, so students who don't speak the same language can seamlessly work together. Now, video game companies are already doing all of this, but because it's not as profitable as what they're already doing yet, I think it's coming. As a small side project, I've actually already been talking to some colleagues at Stanford, and if I had more time, I'd be working on that with them, perhaps even leaving academia to pursue this idea as a startup company. Our second case study builds off of artificial intelligence. ChatGPT has recently made a big splash, but the basis for this has been around for a long time. ChatGPT is linguistically gifted, but there's other artificial intelligences that have similar abilities in organization, optimization, knowledge acquisition, and integration. For example, artificial intelligence can listen to all the data streaming back and forth and create models of how a system works. Some industries are already using this to create models of how their internal systems actually work, as opposed to what's written down on paper. With these models, they create a digital twin of their company. And with this twin, they can simulate what might happen if they make certain changes. Now, on your smartphone on most of ours, is a health app. Imagine that right next to it is an education app. And like the health app, it's listening all the time. It can see your calendar, your email. It's hearing your conversations. It can detect when your voice sounds stressed or when you're engaged. You can detect your breathing patterns even. And if it's synced to a smartwatch, it can also track your heart rate and some other biological markers. Over time, a model of you is being created, of how you learn, what excites and engages you, what also when you're stressed. It can predict when you're most likely to try something new and when it would be better to stick to something you already know. It'll use this model to suggest events, books, movies, and time them so that they would be doled out when you're most receptive. Over time, this becomes your own personal education coach. Amazon, Netflix, and other companies are already doing versions of this. Now imagine that this education app has been with you your entire life. My own children got their first issued iPad when they were 5 years old. Imagine how good this digital coach could become. Now imagine that my kids are going to college. In fact, my daughter is going next year in another year. Rather than write an essay or submit your grades, she would just give access to the settings on her education app. The college that she's applying to, they might have a digital twin of their own campus and perform mass simulations with all the permutations of the thousands of applicants, and then use the results to determine who's accepted and who's denied. Now, imagine combining the ideas in the two case studies that I presented. What if an artificial intelligence could design the virtual reality worlds? It already has easy access to incredible amounts of information on the web to create the clues. And it could probably even create custom environments for each individual based on the settings in their learning app. Now, does this sound terrifying? To me, yes, it sounds terrifying. But we don't seem all that bothered by the fact that Google and Amazon and even our grocery stores are already doing some version of this. Is this where higher education is headed? I honestly don't know. My scenarios were just meant to give you an idea of the kind of paradigm shift that we could be headed towards. And this was only taking into account the technological disruption. Imagine exploring the ripple effect of what I just talked about through all of the other areas of Steepled. So I want to finish up and then open it up to some questions. The premise of this talk was that education, like all complex adaptive systems, will naturally build up tensions due to internal and external forces, resulting in avalanches of all sizes, and some of those might be considered a paradigm shift. Higher education has undergone shifts before and will do so again. Given the current state of tension in the system, both along multiple dimensions, but also internal and external, we seem ripe for a disruption, maybe even during our careers as faculty. What education looks like on the other side of this shift is anyone's guess, but it could look very different than it does today, perhaps even calling into question the roles that we play. Are we simply existing for the sake of existing? After all, that is the essence of being an autopoietic system. And like all super wicked problems, it's hard to pin down. And unfortunately, I probably have not done much to even try to clarify the problem. And I know I haven't outlined a solution. But I want to leave you on a hopeful note. No matter what the tensions, there will always be a reason for higher education to exist. The world is facing so many super wicked challenges that the next generation and the generation after them will need to address. Things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals will not be solved in just one generation. As the pandemic taught us, technology is amazing. It's always acted to catalyze changes that were already happening. But it also showed us that there's no substitute for face-to-face learning. This is how our species evolved, and I suspect that no matter how good technology becomes, there will always be a need for human interaction in the learning process. Higher education has faced similar challenges: writing, the printing press, correspondence courses through the mail, and more recently, the rise of online learning. Each of these was trumpeted as the end of institutions like ours, but we've persisted, and I'm hopeful. As the president of Bucknell has said many times, show me a messy problem, and I can show you how education will be a big part of the solution. I think that whatever paradigm shift comes our way, there will still be a need for higher education. Thank you very much, and I think we're at the point where we can probably take some questions.
Conference, thank you very much. I can see me, I can see you. I can see everyone who works in higher education in your paper. That's really amazing. It's a big challenge for us, right? So to understand what's going on and to understand the new paradigm shift. That's a real challenge for us. So I would like to ask for Helen and for other folks, please, other faculty members. Hipólito, poderia colocar o pessoal na mesa, por favor, professor Arlindo, professor Francisco, Helen. Nós estamos aqui aguardando questões, tá certo? Para a gente interagir. Vocês podem fazer perguntas pelo chat, o professor Arlindo já tem uma questão ali, e Helen pode traduzir do português para o inglês para Joe e a resposta do Joe do inglês para o português para a gente. Muito obrigado, acho que foi uma palestra muito esclarecedora e muito provocante para nós. Definitely, this conference is kicking off our semester. Thank you, Joe.
Bom, primeiro, agradecer. Uma das palestras mais densas que eu já ouvi aqui na UEPB. Muita informação. O mapa de tensões do ensino superior é incrível. Essa palestra será replicada, é bom colocar, no YouTube, e passaremos algumas semanas discutindo ela em sala de aula. Meus alunos se preparem. Quero fazer uma pergunta. Okay?
Arlindo, com licença, eu vou tentar traduzir o que você falou agora. Basically, he's thanking you for the presentation. It's been one of the most provocative presentations that they have had in recent years. He's especially impressed with the map of tensions in superior education. And he is now, he also said that your presentation is being recorded. It'll go onto YouTube and is spread out in other means and will surely be studied and talked about among students and faculty in the next few weeks or months. And now he's ready for the question. Okay.
Na página 8, primeiro,
Page
parabéns para o Dewey, excelente pensador e muito estudado por aqui, principalmente na UFPE.
He's saying on page 8, and he's congratulating you on a specific thinker that you talk about. What is
John Dewey.
John Dewey, and including John Dewey, who is yes, he's studied a lot here at our university, and yeah, Arlindo loves.
Me too.
Eu também.
A citação. Os cidadãos educados são a chave para sustentar a democracia.
Okay, so he's citing the sentence that the citizens are key to a thriving democracy.
Como avalia esse pensamento, tomando em consideração os níveis educacionais e tecnológicos que vêm se mostrando em países sabidamente não democráticos?
Ok. Pode repetir mais uma vez, por favor?
Como avalia a citação de que a educação é a chave para a democracia, se hoje observamos um aumento em níveis educacionais em países sabidamente não democráticos?
Okay. So how do you explain or evaluate or analyze the idea that educated citizens are key to democracies when today we're seeing the rise of anti-democratic countries that have highly educated populations?
Mm-hmm. It depends on how much you believe Dewey, and he was writing as a Western thinker.
Então, depende em quanto você acredita em Dewey, e ele estava escrevendo como um pensador do Oeste, né?
If you study Eastern philosophers, you may hear a very different perspective.
Se estudasse filósofos do leste, da parte da Ásia, etc., poderia escutar outra perspectiva. Mais uma pergunta para Arlindo. Follow-up question? Para seguir nessa linha de pensamento?
Tenho 200. Se você deixar,
he says he has 200 questions here.
You can say I'm happy to schedule other times to talk.
Okay.
I love doing this. This is fun for me.
Ele estaria muito contente em marcar outra hora para conversar com você, professor Arlindo, porque ele adora conversar sobre essas ideias.
Okay, vou cobrar.
He says he's gonna keep you to it.
Vou fazer outra, né?
Okay, so he's gonna ask another question.
Página 9.
Page 9. Parágrafo. Que parágrafo?
41.
41. Paragraph 41.
As 4. Todo aluno deve ser capaz de dizer. The 4 capabilities. Não acha que é muita responsabilidade para uma universidade assumir? A gente já tem tantas tensões e dificuldades. Seria isso, como ele avalia essa super responsabilização da universidade.
Okay.
I think I got parts of it.
Yeah. So he's asking about a certain concept, which I need him to repeat. But the question is, don't you think it's a lot of responsibility for universities to take on, given all of the tensions and everything else that they're dealing with? Mas o pensamento em específico era todo aluno tem.
This will not be a perfect answer to what I think is being asked, but it may help.
Ele disse que esse não vai ser uma resposta perfeita ao que eu acho que está sendo perguntado, mas acredito que isso poderia ajudar.
It's a question of, are our students gaining these in other places, such as
É uma
parents?
questão de se nossos alunos estão ganhando esse conhecimento em outros lugares, como nas suas famílias.
And so it's hard to know where does
Então,
the
é difícil
responsibility of the
saber.
university begin and end.
É difícil saber onde a responsabilidade da universidade começa e termina.
That may be part of the paradigm shift.
Esse poderia ser uma parte da mudança de paradigma, né, da universidade.
I hope not, because it means so much more work for us.
Eu espero que não, porque significa muito mais trabalho para nós.
No Brasil, a gente assiste, muitas vezes, esse excesso de responsabilidade no ensino básico.
In Brazil, we actually experience the excess of responsibility. We've seen this at the elementary school level.
Here too.
Aqui também, nos Estados Unidos.
Now, there are other places that take this partially to the extreme. I mentioned Sweden.
Agora, tem outros lugares que toma essa ideia até o extremo. Eu já mencionei a Suécia.
The government takes a lot of responsibility, a lot more responsibility.
O governo toma muito mais responsabilidade.
I promise I will come back to visit sometime.
Eu prometo que voltarei a visitar em algum momento.
O nosso pró-reitor está aqui assistindo e vamos tentar trazê-lo para o nosso congresso, viu? Universitário.
The leadership of the university is listening, and they're going to try to bring you physically to the campus to participate in a conference.
That would be fun.
Seria muito legal, muito divertido.
Between 6 and 10 of November.
It's between the 6th and the 10th of November.
In November this year.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Helen, you can tell them that I will have to negotiate with your sister.
Ele vai precisar negociar com a esposa dela, que é minha irmã, mas eu... Yeah.
Joe, in Brazil, after 2004, the universities, public and national universities, they spread in the whole country, in the rural areas, like my area, in the countryside. And then...
Peraí, vou traduzir. Joe, no Brasil, a educação superior, desde 2004, teve uma expansão até a zona rural, nos interiores, como na minha cidade.
So it demanded a lot of infrastructures, buildings, faculties, assistants.
Ela demandou muita infraestrutura, pessoal, demandou um investimento enorme.
After the pandemic, we discovered the importance of the virtual learning, right?
Depois da pandemia, descobrimos a importância da aprendizagem virtual, né? A educação virtual.
So right now we have dozens of courses that we can apply for virtual class, right?
Então agora existem dezenas de cursos dos quais a gente pode fazer, né? Ter acesso.
And I am really worried about the impact of these new universities and technological centers, because they can be empty in some time, right? No students. And Paulo Freire. Okay.
Peraí,
go ahead, please. No problem. Go ahead.
Então, isso me preocupa, a existência agora desses cursos remotos, online. Como eles irão afetar esses campos físicos que foram construídos e implementados na zona rural?
It's not only about campus, but the whole life in that area, because people...
E não somente os campos, mas a vida inteira naquelas regiões, porque as pessoas...
People open restaurants and they have houses for rent, and a lot of money can spread in that area. So we have a problem. So
porque a introdução das universidades nessas áreas já afetam a economia local, pessoas abrindo restaurantes, pessoas alugando casas e apartamentos para atender as necessidades dessas universidades.
My question is, what do you think about the filter of these areas? They can be anything because if we don't have students, we don't have professors. So
Então, minha pergunta é: o que o senhor pensa sobre essa realidade? Porque, como o senhor sabe, se não tem alunos, não tem professores. Não sei se tem mais a perguntar, Otacílio.
no, thanks.
Ok.
Is the worry more about the local economy or about what will happen to the faculty and the students at these universities?
Então, a preocupação é mais relacionado à economia local ou aos professores e faculdades, né, dessas instituições?
In this case, I'm worried about the local economy because we have laws to protect professors here, so we don't lose our jobs because of that. We can move to other campus, for example.
E nesse caso, eu estou mais preocupada pelas economias locais, porque aqui no Brasil existem leis que protegem os professores, então nós não vamos perder nossos empregos, nós vamos simplesmente ser transferidos a outros campos.
And also, I'm worried about the quality of this learning, because one thing is if I have 12 students in my classroom in presence. Other thing that we have dozens of students that I have to teach online. So I am asking about the quality. That quality is good. I don't know really.
Ele também está preocupado pela qualidade da aprendizagem, né? É diferente que se tem 12 alunos presenciais ou dezenas ou centenas de alunos remotos.
There's many pieces.
Existem muitos aspectos dessa
and I'm not an economist.
E eu não sou economista.
But here's what I think.
Mas isso que eu penso.
Two parts.
Duas partes.
The first part is universities often create highly educated people who will go out and work in the community.
A primeira parte é que as universidades frequentemente criam pessoas altamente educadas que saem e trabalham nas comunidades.
And they can help the economy thrive. They will start new businesses.
Eles podem ajudar a economia local a se desenvolver e ter vida, abrindo empresas, etc.
But then the other economic impact is what you were mentioning.
Mas tem outro impacto econômico, o que o senhor estava mencionando.
And that's that there's employment of the professors. There are students who stay there and spend money in the community.
Que tem trabalho, né, oficial para os professores e que existem alunos que pagam para ficar dentro de uma sala de aula.
And universities often are more stable over time than other businesses.
E universidades muitas vezes estão mais estáveis no decorrer do tempo do que outras empresas.
For example, where I live, all of the towns around me were about logging and about coal.
Por exemplo, onde eu moro, antes todas as cidades, os povoados ao redor estavam dependentes em mineração e desflorestação, né, para vender os recursos naturais.
When those industries collapsed, those towns collapsed.
Quando essas indústrias não existiam mais, aí esse foi o fim dessas cidades.
But my
Porém,
town continued to do very well because of the university.
mas a minha cidade em particular continua forte por causa da existência da universidade.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
Do we have more questions or?
Tem mais perguntas?
I have one final question.
Eu tenho uma pergunta final.
I think we have some problem with the societies. I'm talking about.
Eu penso que temos problemas com as sociedades. Estou falando em específico.
We have too much misinformation.
Temos
too much obscurities.
demais informação. Desinformação, obrigado.
And obscurities.
E obscuridades.
For example, in Brazil, everyone knows that.
No Brasil, todo mundo sabe que
almost 50% of the people here believe that we can become a communist country. That's
quase
really
50% da população aqui no Brasil acredita que o Brasil poderá virar um país comunista.
This kind of obscurity,
esse tipo de obscuridade,
they are informed people by social media, new technologies.
Estão informando as pessoas por meio da mídia social e outras tecnologias
And then I am asked about our mission, like academic and the universities. How can we confront that?
Então, eu estou perguntando qual é a nossa missão, dado esse contexto, e como podemos confrontar a desinformação.
That's a hard question to answer.
Essa é uma pergunta muito difícil de responder.
But I think there's a long-term way to think and a short-term way to
Mas
think.
eu penso que tem uma forma a longo prazo para pensar e outra de curto prazo.
The long term is that we have to train our students.
A longo prazo, precisamos treinar nossos alunos a pensar por si mesmos e estar conscientes, né, do que está acontecendo.
But none of that will matter.
Mas nada disso vai importar
if we don't think of some short-term things to do.
Se nós não pensamos em respostas de curto prazo para fazer.
I know in the States, we've
aqui nos Estados Unidos observamos
that social media is the platform
que a mídia social é a plataforma que está sendo usada.
So there's a movement to send out our information through social media too.
Então tem movimento para utilizar a mídia social para enviar nossa informação também.
So, a counter message.
Uma mensagem, uma contra-mensagem.
But I don't have the answers.
Mas eu não tenho essas respostas.
I wish I did.
Queria ter.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
I think
Obrigado,
we are finishing our transmission, and it is a really pleasure to have you with us, to support us during this inaugural lecture or master class.
Muito obrigado, Joe, por sua presença e seu apoio e sua apresentação para a nossa aula inaugural. Acredito que já chegamos ao final da apresentação. Estamos muito agradecidos pela sua participação.
Let me tell something in português, please. Eu queria agradecer também a Arlindo e Margarete por acolherem a proposta. Eu conversei com a Arlindo e eles foram muito gentis comigo em acolher a proposta, em trazer o Joe. Contactamos o Francisco Jaime.
Otacílio is thanking the rest of the people that helped to organize the event.
E também Hipólito e você, Helen, da DJ Idiomas, que também está prestando suporte para nós. Convidei você para fazer parte aqui da live. Você, de pronto, deixou até trabalhos que você faz com seus alunos, né, em inglês, para nos dar suporte. Eu agradeço a você
Prazer.
e também a presença da reitora, da vice-reitora, não é? Também do professor Hipólito por nos ajudar nessa live, a comunidade aí presente, os professores, alunos nossos, técnicos administrativos. Né? Essas são minhas palavras finais, mas eu gostaria que o professor Arlindo concluísse a live e depois eu poderia falar um pouquinho mais de me despedir de Joe e você acha que Arlindo pode falar alguma coisa?
So he's going to ask Arlindo to say a few more words, and then he's going to say a few more words as well, basically thanking you again.
Agradecer a todos, agradecer ao engajamento de nossa comunidade acadêmica. Uma aula muito rica, com certeza gerará frutos. Aguardo o professor na próxima, que é sempre a melhor.
So, Joe, he is thanking you again for a very rich presentation that will generate a lot of fruits, and he'll be waiting for you here in Brazil.
Professor Francisco
Thank you
Jaime,
very much.
No, I want to grateful Professor Tranquillo for your presentation. It's a very, very nice presentation. And we wait you in November here talking about Ellen's sister for your permission. I know that. Thank you.
Obrigado.
So thank you very much, Joe. Thank you for support us. It is a really pleasure to have this meeting together, and I hope we can meet again in the future. Thank you very much.
Well, boa noite.
Boa noite.
Good night, everyone.